And now we're very excited to be joined by Ramsey Reid, who's a senior advisor at the DNC, who has been really deeply focused on the third party threat in this election cycle. Ramsey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So start by telling us a little bit actually about what this role and your focus has been like the past year. And I know there have been a lot of changes to the third party candidates and potential candidates over the past year, and it's sort of ebbed and flowed. But I still personally have so much PTSD from 2016 when I was running all of the digital programs at Priorities USA, a major super PAC, and we were the only organization that was really tasked with trying to educate voters in the battleground states about the threat of Jill Stein in particular and other third-party candidates' spoilers. And it was obviously too little too late, because Jill Stein did actually pull enough votes to be the margin between Trump and Clinton in a few states in that election. So I am constantly nervous about the role third-party candidates play, and especially around young people who might not be as educated about the Electoral College or how it works. And so just talk a little bit about how you perceive the third-party landscape and the role that it will or could play in this super close election.
Yeah, and you're right. It has changed and evolved over the course of the cycle, which is something that we definitely anticipated. But I think we entered the year with a very clear idea that there were serious threats posed by independent and third-party candidates. And it was unlike any recent cycle due to both the number of candidates and also the unique roles that they play. And so, we sought to build an operation that was national in scale, that could focus on holding them accountable to the same rules for ballot access that we have to play by, and to educate voters around the threat that they play and the risk that they have in, previously President Biden's reelection and now Vice President Harris's election. So that's what we've been focused on. And, I think the very initially, what we saw was Donald Trump's top donor, Timothy Mellon, giving huge sums of money to a super PAC for RFK Jr.'s ballot access. And that was really where we got started with this. And now we're really focused on educating voters around Jill Stein in particular and the risk that she plays to Kamala Harris's election.
Can you explain a little bit for our listeners too, sort of where it stands in terms of where third-party candidates, including Jill Stein, are on the ballot and where they're not? I know that is so much of the focus that you guys had up until this late point in the cycle, is just trying to, figure out where they are getting on the ballot, where they're not. It's different in each state, as I understand it, but it's complicated. So what's sort of the simplest way of understanding how third-party candidates get on the ballot and where Jill Stein and Cornel West and any other candidates you guys are tracking are on the ballot this cycle?
Yeah, so every state has different rules for how candidates get on the ballot, depending on what office they're running for and whether or not they're running as independents or as nominees of parties. And so for the third parties, I think that the simplest way to sort of explain where we are right now is in the battleground states. Jill Stein is on the ballot in almost all of them. She's not on the ballot in Nevada. Cornel West is on in a sort of a spotty set of states. He is not on the ballot in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. He was ruled ineligible in Georgia, although the Republican Secretary of State decided that they should print his name on the ballot anyways. And so we're dealing with this, I think, broadly across the battleground states, and there are candidates that voters need to be educated about generally in each of the states.
I wonder, so how do you think where are we now then, I guess, 13 days out? What's your assessment of how successful your effort's been? What should people be thinking about? What might happen here? Lightning did strike. The last two Republican presidents won their elections to a great degree because of the peeling off of third-party votes, Bush in 2000 and Trump in 2016. So, give us your assessment of how successful you've been, and what we should be thinking about in these last 13 days.
Well, I think what's most important and is top of mind for us is that it's going to be close. It appears like every battleground state is very close. And so when you are scrapping for every last possible vote, it's important to make sure that people understand that there are two candidates who have a path to victory, Harris and Trump. And you can't take a risk voting for Jill Stein or for third-party candidates and delivering Trump back to the White House. And so, I think in the context of where we were, where we started this year and where we are now, we've made a lot of progress. But as Tara mentioned, we're not going to take anything for granted, remembering what happened in 2016 and in 2000. And I think what's really worrying for us is the extent to which Republicans have gone to prop up these candidates. And that, I think, is what's really important for people to understand and to think about as they are, talking to family and friends and people that they know who might be considering voting for a third party candidate. Jill Stein in particular has hired Jay Sekulow as one of her lawyers, infamously Trump's former personal lawyer working on his impeachment proceedings. He's also chief legal counsel at ACLJ, which has done a ton of awful things, notably advocating for the implementation of Trump's Muslim ban. So I think we feel on one hand encouraged that it's close and that that there is not an overwhelming amount of enthusiasm for Jill Stein, to put it kindly, but we're not going to take anything for granted.
Can you talk a little bit more? I mean, we have talked in this show about what I call this sort of Republican fuckery, right? Which is this, the games that they play, the red waving of the polls, Elon trying to vote by, right? You only cheat if you're losing. You only cheat. The sign of all of this, the enormous effort, they try to run 3 candidates this time, not just, 1 or 2, right? Like there is a sign to me always of their weakness and not their strength, right? They wouldn't have to drop 80 polls into the poll averages if Donald Trump was winning the election, right? To try to make it look like that he's winning when he's not winning. Can you talk a little bit about just reflecting back on the fact that this has been so nakedly and brazen a Republican project, right? That it's the idea that these are independent or third-party candidates is in other political systems, these things would probably not be allowed because they're so brazenly naked a Republican project, all 3 of these efforts, right? And that there's really at the core of this essentially fraud, right? I mean, these are fraudulent campaigns. These are fraudulent offerings. There's very Trumpian levels of fraud going on here where these candidates are grossly misleading the public about what they're intending to do. They want to elect Donald Trump. They're not running for president. They're not running independent campaigns, right? And so just as somebody who's in the game every day, right, our party is so obsessed with playing by the rules, doing things properly, right, following campaign finance laws, being truthful to the American people. And then there's this stuff, which just seems so unbelievably over the top and brazenly, in our face fraud. And so I don't know, just throw it out.
Simon,
No, it's shocking.
Just to push back a little bit, but I just want to clarify to frame this up before you respond, Ramsey. I don't know necessarily, Ramsey, you would know better than I do, but I don't know necessarily that Cornel West or Jill Stein wants Trump to be president. I think that there is an element here of being really, really, really intentional about having alternatives that come from the ethos of their campaigns. But it's actually the fuckery, excuse my language, of how Republicans leverage these campaigns, these independent campaigns and candidates, and how, frankly, foreign interference leverage them as wedges to be able to pull votes that I think voters are less informed about. But I at least with RFK Jr.'s campaign, and obviously what a wild ride that was, I believe that he genuinely was running to provide an alternative to the 2-party system and the 2 candidates. But maybe that was naive of me, Ramsey. But I just wanted to kind of say, I don't know that so many of these candidates are actually doing it for Trump or on behalf of Trump, but they are being pawns and tools in the Republican machine, the way that they're being leveraged. Is that an accurate assessment, or how would you see it, Ramsey?
Well, I would just look at the facts here. And those are that after Jill Stein helped deliver Trump in 2016 by winning more votes in the blue wall states than his margin, she said she didn't regret it. She's been asked multiple times about how she views her role in 2016 and is she worried about being the Ralph Nader of this election? And she considers it a great badge of honor, I think is what she said, to be compared to Ralph Nader. She says,
and I take back that defense entirely.
she was in she had a conversation with Mehdi Hassan where he said,
I'm just wondering, was during that disastrous Trump presidency, when kids were being kidnapped from their parents at the border, when people were dying en masse from COVID, when he was praising Nazis, doing domestic terrorism, as Butch says, did you ever at any point say, maybe I got that one wrong?
Oh, no, no.
And then she ran again. I think the New York Times wrote a story the other day where they reported that her own family, her adult sons, begged her not to run out of fears that she would spoil the election and deliver it back to Trump. And she
Of
turned
course,
them
we
down.
saw that
And
with the Kennedys too. The entire Kennedy family came out against
exactly. So when you see how she viewed her role in 2016 and her intention to run again, and then you take on top of that the fact that she has hired Jay Sekulow, that she hired a Trump-aligned election-denying lawyer who tried to overturn the election results in 2020 in Wisconsin, that she has received help from Republican consultants for her ballot access, that she has hired consultants who were at the Capitol on January 6th. There is, in our view, no other way to see this than that she prefers Trump would be president than Harris, and that she views her role in this race as spoiling the election. So I don't think Jill Stein deserves a charitable interpretation of her actions. And I personally try and take a charitable view of almost everything because I think it helps me get through and just have like a positive day-to-day experience. But I don't think Jill Stein deserves charity in view of her intentions when you look at sort of a comprehensive view of what she said and how she thinks about her role in this race.
No, that's so important. And then getting that information, though, in front of the voters who may not, have watched that Hassan interview or know this background or certainly know who she hired as her lawyers. How are you guys getting that information out there to the voters who might be susceptible to just believing, the face of her campaign as an alternative if they're not excited about the two primary candidates?
Well, it's important to do, and it's hard to do. It's hard to break through. And I think it's very clear to voters that she doesn't have a path to victory, and it's clear to the press. And so I think for candidates like Stein, it's hard to get coverage, but we have a really amazing team here. Liz Smith, in particular, has done a really amazing job making sure that people have an opportunity to learn about Jill Stein and can sort of decide for themselves. It is a fine line to walk between, elevating someone's profile and also exposing them and holding them accountable. And so I think we try and find a balance there. But I think her own words speak for themselves and the actions of Republicans. Trump himself at a rally in Philly in June said,
Jill Stein, I like her very much. You know why? She takes 100% from them.
And so that is really what we want people to understand, is that when you're voting for Jill Stein, you are actually voting for Donald Trump. That is what Donald Trump wants. That is what Steve Bannon wants. That is what Republican consultants want. And we think it's what Jill Stein wants too.
Well, and just to reinforce that, I mean, the idea that you could be the leader of the Green Party when Biden and Harris have done more to combat climate change than any two politicians in the history of the world. And Donald Trump is the core of his campaign is to roll back everything that they just did and to make the planet warm faster, and whose best allies are the petro dictators in Russia and Saudi Arabia. I mean, the notion that you could claim to have concerns about climate and sustainability and do anything other than be 100% behind Kamala Harris, given how openly aligned Trump is with petro interests and oil interests domestically and abroad, makes the lie even greater, right? I mean, if she was running in some kind of other independent moniker, that would be one thing. But it's why I think it's so important, I think, for people to recognize. And if you look at what she says, in addition to everything you said, I mean, all of her attacks are on her. She never attacks Trump over anything, despite his, incredible retrograde views about climate and energy and everything else. And so can you just talk about how you thread the needle a little bit more about not elevating, but also engaging? I think that's really an interesting thing I think people would benefit from, because I think it's really hard. I mean, I think, our instinct is always to go whole hog, right? And go into something, but you need to find this balance between lifting her up and elevating her, right? While informing people. So talk a little bit more about that, if you wouldn't.
Yeah, and also just quickly, your point on climate is really good. I mean, she watched Donald Trump remake the Supreme Court in the most conservative fashion possible, and they have picked apart essential regulations for stopping climate change, and she has no regret over that. And so it's very clear that she doesn't care about actually trying to solve, the climate challenge. She's really in it to help Trump. In
That's the
terms
most
of
insidious part too. I saw that AOC video, which I really loved.
All you do is show up once every 4 years to speak to people who are justifiably pissed off, but you're just showing up once every 4 years to do that. You're not serious. You're not to me, it does not read as authentic. It reads as predatory.
Like, that's so insidious that like you're representing something that you're not truly. You really are a puppet. And because I do have empathy for people who are like, I hate the two-party system. I want more choices. There are a lot of democratic nations around the world that don't have just two parties. There are kind of more formidable other options. That's not really the case here. But to dupe those people into making them think that they're taking an alternative path that could spur a different kind of conversation around certain issues, but really just be a puppet and be for anti-regulatory candidates or Supreme Courts, that's just, it's so deceptive. That's what really frustrates me. But sorry to interrupt, Ramsey, so you get to the question.
No, yeah, totally agree. And Simon, I think, the balance is really about making clear what kind of the most important things for voters to understand are, which is that she is backed by Republicans. She has no regret over 2016, and she is very clearly hurting Kamala Harris and attacking Kamala Harris with the intention to help Trump. And so we pick our spots very carefully on, what we choose to engage on. She operates as a candidate with the intent to try and hit Democrats and attack Democrats in ways that Trump cannot and doesn't. And so that means you have to be disciplined in how you engage someone who has no intention of trying to win a majority of the vote. She is not trying to get to 270 electoral college votes. Success for her is winning a couple of points in a handful of states that can tip the election to Trump. And so that means she takes she takes positions that are meant to try and divide a wedge between, people who are open to Harris and not to Trump. And so we have to be very careful in how we engage with someone who's not in it in a good faith way.
And I know we only have a minute or two left, and we're really grateful for your time, Ramsey, this close to the election. But if you could just spend 1 minute talking about Cornel West and his campaign, because I have even heard from some friends that they're looking into him. And, one of the bigger national news stories I recall from a number of months ago was actually that China was propping up Cornel West on social media in certain battleground states. So would love to hear from you just kind of how you guys are perceiving his name on the ticket and what voters are looking towards him, knowing that we don't have much time to tie it up. What states are you guys the most worried about, either West or Jill Stein pulling a significant, for them, obviously tiny, but significant enough share of votes that it could really tip the scales?
Cornel West is not particularly active in his campaign. He's not raising resources. He has not put together a real operation, and he's on the ballot because of this nationwide Republican effort to put him there. And there's been a lot of reporting from the AP and NBC and others around the extent to which Republican consultants have gone to evade campaign finance rules and to very quietly behind the scenes put him on the ballot. And that, I think, is a real concern and goes back to one of the questions that Simon had earlier. In terms of where we're concerned, I think broadly the election is going to be close. All of the battleground states look really close. There are candidates, on the ballot in each of them. And so I think for us, we view each of them as important, and that if you live in any of those states, you need to be very careful in considering the choice that you have. And if you're voting for Stein or for West, you're voting for Trump. And that's, I think, the message that we want people to understand in any of those states.
So for folks listening, if you know people in any of the battleground states, and especially Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, but if you know young people that are not excited about the two tickets and they think that this could be an option, telling them that is a vote for Trump, I think I totally agree, Ramsey. That is the most important message. Thank you so much for joining us. I really wanted to have you on to have this conversation because I don't think we talk about the third party threat enough. And it was one of the many, many, many deep cuts that led to Trump winning in 2016. So it's just so important. So we're really grateful that you you and Liz and the rest of the team have been focused on this. It makes me sleep better at night. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Ramsey, for your good work.